Now we're going to move on to postpartum depression specifically, although we're going to be mentioning postpartum blues, postpartum depression, and then finally postpartum psychosis, all within this one overview. And unlike most of my other lectures, I am only going to be presenting a full text and some links, and then just leading you through a few important points, and the rest you can kind of read on your own. You know, I don't do that too often, but I thought it might be useful for this case in moving us to conclusion for the depression notes, and because everything is very specific within this article that I pulled for you. Anyway, let us go to the very beginning of this text that I have uploaded on D2L for you. And you will see ultimately first that we have general information. And this is very straightforward. Again, the postpartum period is a time where there are very dramatic changes in hormone levels. And thus, it is totally reasonable that somebody would go through a period of time of mood adjustments because of the changes in hormone levels. And postpartum blues is very common among women who gave birth. And sometimes it doesn't show up for a few days. But the important thing is, you know, about third, fourth, fifth day, perhaps after delivery, there'll be periods of times, and it can be a few hours, it can be a few days. If it goes beyond 2 or 3 weeks, then we need to start going on and looking at a full-blown postpartum depression. But the blues, feeling, you know, tired, first off, being teary, you know, having some irritability, maybe anxiety, which actually, if you look at like the more primitive animals, if you will, in the wild, this like period of time is actually preventative for losing offspring. The mothers will stay remote, kind of be packed away for a while, taking care of her offspring. And part of the mediating factor for that may be these hormonal changes leading to this don't want to go out there right now feeling. So just trying to tie together a couple of concepts. Anyway, this postpartum blues period should resolve on its own. And if it does not, then one needs to start looking at the possibility that there is a full-blown postpartum depression, which can be, you know, a milder depression, or it can be quite a serious, very severe depression. And the symptoms should not be at all surprising. They should look very much like what you would see with unipolar depression. There are a couple things I do want to point out, because I brought this up when we were talking about the difference between grief, depression caused by personal loss, and clinical depression. And that is that in the grief situation, there is not typically a loss of self-esteem, but in clinical depression, there may be, and very likely is, this feelings of worthlessness or incompetence that's listed here is something that is indicative of a depression, a depressive state after giving birth, during the postpartum period. And that kind of, you know, is parallel to that loss of self-esteem. I do also want to mention something about the feelings of guilt. There are cases when somebody has suffered a personal loss, a loved one, and besides the grief, there is a more intense depression because that person may feel he or she is partially or wholly to blame for the loss of that person's life, in which case we can have extreme feelings of guilt. With the postpartum depression, even though, let's say in the typical case where we have a typical birth and a normally developed child, there may still be feelings of guilt, which are not even, you can't even put your finger on why you might feel guilty. Then again, paralleling what I mentioned about the grief situation, if there are difficulties associated with the delivery or postpartum experience in which there are issues with the newborn, then you may start to layer on this feeling of guilt. It's just, I think, so important for us to understand that not only do you have a roller coaster of hormones going on, you have a change in sleep cycles, you have a new burdens, new responsibilities perhaps, and all of this, it can just, swell into like one of those huge waves at the surf. So it's important to be very aware of the length of time of these feelings and actions, behaviors that are indicative of depression. And if they do extend over a period of time and seem to be incapacitating, then one needs to be evaluated and potentially treated for postpartum depression. Last but not least in this overview is postpartum psychosis. This is such an extremely upsetting disorder. And fortunately, it is rare, but it is very tragic when it occurs. And sometimes the tragedy is worse than others. Very often, it first appears as like bipolar illness, and actually may seem like you have that mania and then depression, but then eventually it just keeps progressing until there is dissociation, confusion, very erratic and disorganized behavior. You can get delusional beliefs, and very often those center on the infant. There actually can be the presence of auditory hallucinations that instruct the mother to harm herself or the infant or both. And such is the case with probably the most infamous case of postpartum psychosis, and that is of Andrea Yates. It's been a while, and she was put in prison for a while, not to be a spoiler alert here going on, but I have some videos of Andrea Yates, home videos, some of them are, and some interviews. And I just want to go over this first one for a few moments. Usually I just say, watch the link and on your own time. But because there are things I really would like to say about this, I'm going to bring it up now and then discuss it real briefly once we all kind of watch it. And again, the computer is incredibly irresponsible. And I had opened this just a few, bear with me, just like class, what can I say? It happens. Open, there we go, open hyperlink. Okay. There are other links with some subsequent, shoot, thought I had that turned off. There we go. Let's try that again. And there were subsequent circumstances, and as you probably recall or figured out well, and from what was said in there, she ultimately, one at a time, drowned each of her children in the bathtub. And a couple of things that I want to mention, and I do hope you'll go on and look at some more of the links, as disturbing, and they're incredibly disturbing. The whole thing is incredibly disturbing to me. I want to comment a little bit on how the symptoms were presented, that they were increasing, and that there were other circumstances that I thought personally, and I still do, also contributed to the progression. One of those being the extreme amount of pressure that I think it appears that Andrea was under. I am not convinced that it was her choice to stay isolated, which apparently she was quite isolated with her children, and that the fatigue that could happen, but these rebounds of depressive episodes, the warning that was not taken seriously by at least Rusty Yates, obviously didn't take it seriously at all. I do want to also comment that I just find it really hard personally to believe that she was psychotic, had an injection and a couple doses of meds, which, okay, think about what we know about antidepressants, and the next day had the best conversation ever with her husband, Rusty. I feel frustrated myself because the doctors, I am sure, were extremely concerned and yet had absolutely no control over what was happening. During class, if we were in the classroom face to face with all of you there at one time, like in the good old days, we would have a conversation now, and I'm sure different ones of you would make comments, and you know, say what you think or what you don't think, especially after you watch some more of the video links. I can put a discussion post up for anybody who might want to share their feelings, but I do want to say it's not mandatory. I'm not going to grade any of you on whether you want to sit there and write a bunch of stuff, or and me evaluate how much your thought is worth, because but if you want a place to kind of emote, if you will, or share an opinion or a thought, I can certainly do that. But it is clear that this is a real thing and something to be taken very, very seriously. So it is a very sad note to end on, and I wish I could make it happier. I guess the most optimistic thing I can say right now, though, is the psychosis, postpartum psychosis, is very rare. It is treatable more now than ever, and choices can be made along the way. Postpartum depression is serious. Should be evaluated if it seems like it may be present in the postpartum period and the months even following giving birth. It may not present right away, and it can also be treated, and it should be treated in those who are, especially if they're incapacitated. And then moving one step back to the least of the three, and that is the postpartum blues, which is common and one can overcome, and it's short-lived, and not, and in and of itself, not something that needs to be treated with medication typically. So just being aware of the different psychiatric postpartum illnesses, the blues really limited, self-limited, depression being something that may not be self-limited and it likely needs attention, and then third, postpartum psychosis. So that is the end of the segments on any forms of depression. And hopefully there are some things that have tied together throughout all of this and makes a little sense. Maybe some of the neurotransmitters even make a little sense now.